Hello family, it's African Esquire and I'm here with a new video. Today I'm going to talk about the inherent need of a white supremacist system to validate itself with symbols of loyalty for black people to adhere to, and not just black people but for the whole people who are under the system to adhere to, and how if you are someone who challenges those images and if you are someone who wants to speak out against them, that system has an inherent fear of basically imploding, because the white supremacist system survives off of the people being inside of a trance. The system survives off the people being in la la land, believing these ideals that actually aren't true or actually don't apply to all of us. The system only can survive as long as we are kept inside of this trance where we really believe that the American system or the American values, American exceptionalism, and in this case we're going to be talking about the idea of Britain and exceptionalism. The system will only exist as long as we believe in these ideals, and most importantly, we believe these ideals are for us, despite the fact that these ideals have never been applied to us as African people or any people whose interest it is for the imperialist powers to maintain control over those people. So I'm going to play a clip. It's a long clip, but basically, you know, I wanted to cut it up more, but realistically there's so much that's said in this clip that I really want to analyze, and I really want you to catch all of it. But basically, to set the groundwork, so basically Professor Kehinde Andrews went on to Good Morning Britain, and Good Morning Britain is hosted by Piers Morgan. You might remember him because he used to be a CNN host. He's also besties with Donald Trump, so that's his guy. And he went on here basically to debate Winston Churchill, that the idea that Winston Churchill should be celebrated by everyone in Britain and that he should be held up as this great leader despite all of his many flaws. And if you don't know, Winston Churchill was a horrible person. He was just as bloodthirsty, just as terroristic, just as tyrannical as name anyone, Stalin, Hitler, name anyone. But the reason why Winston Churchill doesn't get looked at as someone who is a tyrant, someone who is inhumane, someone who is, you know, a disgusting figure in history, he gets exempt from these things because his abuses were exclusively carried out, almost exclusively carried out, against people who were basically considered undesirable. And most relevant would be to this channel would be his abuses were carried out against African people, but also many other countries such as people in India or people in the Middle East. Any people who were considered undesirable, those were the focal points of his human rights abuses, of his horrible concentration camps. This dude had concentration camps in India whenever the Mau uprising was happening. He worked inside of concentration camps in South Africa. Inside of India, he was responsible for the starvation of millions and millions of Indians. This man has so much blood on his hands. But because it's not that he did these things against Europeans, or that he did these things against Americans, or that he did these things against people who are considered desirable inside of this white supremacist system, he doesn't get vilified like someone like a Hitler, someone like a Stalin. He doesn't get to be on that list of worst terrorists or worst people in history to have done things against humanity. Instead, he actually gets celebrated as a war hero, because while he was this horrible, disgusting, bloodthirsty person against undesirable people, he was considered a hero and considered someone who really saved the Allies inside of World War II. And because of his efforts, the world exists as it is today, as far as the Western European countries really having so much power, as well as the United States having so much power. So I'm going to play this clip. And like I said, it's going to be a little bit long, but I'm going to play this clip and I'm going to come back and I'm going to talk about some specific points that they hit that I think have to be expounded on a little bit more. Okay, so you've seen the clip, and if you're like me, there were so many inconsistencies, and big ups to Professor Kahindi because he really handled them well. He was a little bit, he's a lot less irritated than I would be because what Piers Morgan and the other co-hosts were saying was just a bunch of bullcrap. And I think he made a really good point where he really stayed on the point of when you look at what Hitler did versus what Winston Churchill did. And just to read you some figures, Winston Churchill, just in Kenya, whenever there was the Mau Mau uprisings, he had put 115,000 African people in concentration camps. And again, what was Hitler's his big crime against humanity, putting Jews inside of concentration camps? 14,000 African people died in these concentration camps, and it's also very interesting to know that one of the people who was held inside of these concentration camps was former President Barack Obama's grandfather, which is why Obama was not with it whenever he seen Winston Churchill's, I think it was his statue that was inside of the White House, or his portrait, one or the other. He had it removed because his grandfather was put in a concentration camp by the same guy. He never spoke on it, he never expounded on it, but it's very interesting that that would so happen to be the case. Now, when you consider what he was saying, Professor Kahindi, when you look at someone like Hitler, someone like Winston Churchill, pick anyone inside of history that was considered evil, anyone that's considered horrible. Saddam Hussein is considered horrible. Gaddafi, like all these people are considered horrible. What is it that makes them different than the ones that are considered good? For example, while you might consider Saddam Hussein horrible, someone might say, well, George Bush, he did a great job of trying to fight the tyranny. Well, what makes it different is that one side won and the other side lost. And we have to understand that whenever you win these battles, the winner, the victor, will always have his side of history told, because as a part of getting power, from the power that you got from winning that battle, you have the ability to tell your own narrative. And that is exactly what happened, is that Winston Churchill, he was on the winning side. Therefore, the conversation goes around how great he was, how many great things he did, the fact that he managed to motivate the British Empire, and no one's talking about the horrible things that he has done. And this is not just with Winston Churchill, this is with colonialism, period. Because had Africans overcome under colonialism, we wouldn't be having these conversations about these great figures, because the victors would have been African people. And I believe someday, by the grace of God, the victors will be African people if we can come together united and actually have an agenda that we're actually collectively working towards. But so what he said was very powerful. The fact that Winston Churchill versus Hitler, if you look at their views, and in this instance he was talking about his views towards Indians, they were so reminiscent that the only thing that is different is that one won the battle and the other one lost. And because the one won the battle, we can basically pretend as though he is this great grand figure inside of human history. Now, the reason why this upset Piers Morgan and all these white co-hosts so much is because if these people who have built up the British Empire, as they've called it, and they should know by now, the British Empire was built up with blood, colonialism, corruption, murders. That is what built up the empire. To criticize these people who are responsible for creating this empire would basically be criticizing and indicting the empire in itself. Because when you're built by blood, when you're built by the misery of others, and not just from the past, but you continue to be built from the blood and misery of others, then that means that anything that calls you out for what you have done is a threat to your sovereignty. It's a threat to you being able to maintain power. So it really wasn't about Winston Churchill. That's the thing we have to understand. This wasn't just about Winston Churchill. This is the whole British Empire, the whole British civilization that is on trial inside of this interview. Because if you can say these things about him, you can say these things about all the things that they have done. And the reason why they are considered a great country is not because they were sweet and kind. One of the co-hosts said, oh, well, what about Britain being a multicultural nation? That's not why Britain's considered one of the the biggest powerhouses, or why people consider Britain or England to be a great place. It's not because it's multicultural. It's because of the riches, the spoils that have been taken from African people, from Indian people, from people in the Middle East. That is why Britain is considered the richest place, the most powerful place. It's really not anymore, but at one time it was considered that. And that's why today it gets glorified as this powerful nation, or this symbol of victory, because of the things that Britain was able to take from these other countries in order to enrich itself. Now, I'm going to go through a couple of more points. Now, the reason why white supremacy does not like being called out is because we have to at one point understand that so much of our day-to-day lives is controlled by white supremacy. And I'm talking about white supremacy in the institutional sense. These institutions that we fight to get into, these institutions that we fight to be glorified by, that we fight to get validation from, these are institutions that were created for the upliftment of a certain type of people, and were created to maintain the dominance over the rest of us. So we have to understand that white supremacy, anytime it's on trial, anytime that you're going to call it out for what it has done, is always going to be reluctant to even maintain any type of wrongdoing. They weren't even willing to say that what he did that caused the murder of millions and millions of people was something that was just as wrong as what Adolf Hitler did. Because something also that I love that Professor Kahindi Andrews said, he said, when they were saying, well, with Churchill, because of him, the British, we were able to win the war, and because of him, the British were able to, you know, be on the good side of history and all these great things. And his answer was, okay, that's great that he did all those things for you, but what about the Indians and the Africans? Don't they matter just as much as you? And that's a very interesting point to bring up, because a lot of times with this white nationalistic mindset, I would say more often than not, we are painted this picture that being born in Britain is the most important thing. Being born in the United States is the most important attribute of you. The most important attribute of you should be that you're a human being. And as a human being, you have human rights. You have rights that have to be respected. I always hate, like, when I see news stories and they say, well, you know, there was 13 Americans that died in this attack, and 300 Africans. We're going to forget about the 300 Africans, and we're going to say there's 13 Americans, and that was something that actually counted to us. Because obviously the thing that's being implied here is that the American lives, and they don't even just say American, you can be any type of European nation if you ever notice. They'll say 13 people who were French, 13 people who were from England, who were from Italy. They will purposely put these things in here because although they won't say it, the truth is they view European lives as more important. They view people who come from European civilization, Western European civilization, as being more validated than the people who were conquered by Western civilization. So the answer is, when he said, well, what about the Indians who died? What about the Africans who died? These are people who actually were killed. And the answer is they don't care. It doesn't matter to them, because the fact is, as long as you are not within the confines of their civilization, of their sense of what what society is, then you basically do not matter. They sleep fine at night knowing that they live in a country that was built on the spoils of African people from around the world. They feel fine with that. They feel fine with what they did inside of the Caribbean. They feel fine about what they did inside of Africa, and they'll sleep fine about that continuously, because the fact is, without having committed those mass atrocities, the United Kingdom or Britain would not be in the position it is today, where they are still exploiting and still doing things that are corrupt inside of the world, but they are able to do it from a position of power. So the other thing that I noted inside of this interview is that one of the white co-hosts said, well, can't we just say that those were the views of the times? And notice, they only bring that up that idea of, well, these are the views of the times. And I remember hearing this like whenever I was in American history inside of public school, and we were talking about things like slavery, like, yeah, you know, George Washington said this, or Thomas Jefferson said this, but you know, that's just how they thought back then. But this is always the case, that there are always going to be ignorant views in every single time. The question is, number one, what were the ideals of the time? In Britain at that time, the ideal was equality. In the United States, they had a document called the Constitution, where they said all men are equal. Those were the ideals of the time. So regardless of what their views were, they had purposely written out that this is what we stand for. Yet, despite writing that out, they chose to be selective. So yes, you are indicted because you felt like this was a good enough point to make. You felt like this was a good enough moral code to have, but you were not willing to apply that moral code evenly to everyone, meaning it was not actually important for you to actually live by your moral code. You felt like it was a thing of convenience. So as far as Churchill, well, these were the times that he was in. Well, did they not have did they not have the Magna Carta back then? Did they not have the idea that all people are equal? Did they not have these universal ideals of humanity? So it's not just the views of the time. He was a hypocrite, like every single European colonialist, because they go into these situations saying we're going into these situations for the good of the people, but in reality they're going in it for their own self-interest. So he was just a hypocrite. There's no saying, well, these were just the views of the time, because the views of the time, even back then, you are indicted by your own views based on your own moral codes. Mind you, this is post-slavery that we're talking about all these things, and they came together with different European countries and said, well, you know, we're going to stop slavery because this is an evil. That didn't stop them from colonialism. Think about that. They came together and said slavery is an inherent evil, and went right into Africa right after this and committed colonialism in Africa. So clearly they don't care about what it is that is their a moral standard that they say they believe in. The fact is, it's about what is convenient in that moment and what will support the white supremacist system. At the time when slavery was no longer being accepted, it was because there was so much backlash that it was not worth the risk. Colonialism, however, could be pitched in a way that it was worth that risk. So the second that it was no longer worth the risk to have colonialism, that's when they tried and changed it up, and when it became neo-colonialism. And neo-colonialism is harder to identify, therefore they're still in there, and they still haven't had the pushback to actually withdraw from doing these colonialistic policies inside of African countries, and so they continue to live and adhere by these things that are still hurting and exploiting the people of African countries and also other countries inside of the world. So the other thing that I like that was brought up, they said the professor said that, you know, well, there were Indians and Africans who fought inside of World War II. And the guy who was basically debating him said, well, yeah, and by the way, this is true. We should learn this. There were Indians and Africans that were fighting in World War II. And they tried to make it a point to say that, exactly, this is why Winston Churchill was so important. Because without him, it's not just about white people. Also, those Indians and Africans that were fighting in World War II, it's about them too. He didn't just motivate the whites, he also motivated the blacks. We should know that that's absolutely, completely not relevant to the situation. For the people who were African in World War II who were fighting, they were fighting in World War II because they were forced to fight, or because they were told if they do fight that you will have freedom and you will be able to come back to your country and you will not have to deal with all of the racial oppression that you deal with inside of this African country. So they went away and fought while their country was still in bondage, while the British were still colonizing their country, still inflicting racist policies on their countries, still exploiting their countries openly, calling it their own, doing these things unapologetically. They went and fought in World War II. What happened actually is that they came back to these countries and found that although they had fought on behalf of Britain, although they had fought on behalf of the Allies, that they were living just as bad of conditions that they were in before they left, before they were drafted or decided to enlist inside of the British Army. So why is this relevant? To try to use this, the fact that there were Indians and Africans inside of the war, as a way to glorify the fact that Winston Churchill, well, he also motivated Indians and Africans, it completely misses the point. Because what he did not do for those Indians and Africans who fought, many of them died, for the country of Britain, whenever they went back to their country, they were still treated as slaves and subjects. And that's really why colonialism began to unravel, because once black people taste freedom and taste what it means to be free from all types of oppression, once they taste it and they believe that things are going to change, you really can't undo that. And that's what happened in World War II. A lot of the soldiers, they were waiting for something to happen when they got back. And when they seen that the British were going to try to keep doing what they were already doing before the war, and they were going to keep doing that, they said, no, we're not going to do this anymore. We're going to have a revolution. And that's really where the decolonization of Africa really stemmed in. So, the other thing I really thought was a good point to bring up. The Piers Morgan, I think it was actually one of the bald-headed guy, I forget his name. He brings up the fact, well, why do you still live here if you feel this way about Britain? You hate Britain so much, so why do you still live here? And he had a brilliant answer, because this is the question that we're always asked. I'm asked this question. I'm asked this question by some of my own people. That's the funny thing. Some of our brothers and sisters who are in the DOS movement have asked, why do you still live here if you feel this way? The fact is, when you are inside of a white supremacist world, there is nowhere you can go to escape white supremacy. So if you are fighting against white supremacy, your destination has to be based on the most strategic place for you to be at the time. So when you say, go back to Africa if you feel that way, well, Africa is still colonized. It's just colonized under neo-colonialism instead of explicit colonialism. And we know that Africans, they are still facing the same oppression, although it's just painted differently, because there's not a white man directly there who is inflicting the pain. Instead, they hired black people to inflict the pain and be the representatives of the oppression. So because of this, there's really nowhere you can go as an African person and be free. There's nowhere. I don't care if you go to the Caribbean, they're colonized in every single one of those countries. I don't care if you find somewhere in Africa, that country is colonized. Every single place is colonized. So therefore, the question is not, where can I go? The question is, what can I do to actually liberate my people wherever I am? Whether you're in America, whether you're in Africa, whether you're in Britain. The question is not, oh, you need to go back to where you want to be. Well, no. Africa as it is not where I ultimately want to be, because it's not free yet. Although, you know, to me, even in the condition it is now, Africa is better than a lot of the places that we deal with in America. But it's not its full potential, because it's not free yet. It's not able to be on its own, to be self-reliant, to actually have the power and actually control its resources. So if anything, my goal is to strategize and figure out what is the best place, where is the best place for me to be in a struggle, what is the best thing for me to be doing, not necessarily where can I run to escape this white man, because the white man is every single place on this earth. To answer their question on why won't you just leave. Now, they asked a question and said, well, what can Britain do to make you feel better? And he had all the answers that I really would have said. He said, reparations. But I want to stop the reparations, because we think of reparations as something in the past. We can't just say reparations. It's not just give us money for what was done in the past. First, stop doing what you're already doing. That's where it gets tricky. Stop exploiting. Stop sending your companies over there to exploit the Africans. Stop allowing these things to happen. Stop it. In fact, forget the reparations. Just stop doing what you are now. Stop, so that we can stop the bleeding of Africa and actually recuperate and save ourselves and be able to restructure and actually figure out a way to lift ourselves up. And when they said reparations, he said, do you mean money? Well, what did they take from Africa? They didn't take air from Africa, so we can't be talking about air. They didn't take they didn't take water, so it can't be water. So yes, it's money. You have to stop taking money. You have to stop taking resources. You have to stop taking things from the people. If you're not willing to, first of all, stop doing what you're doing right now, and then we can talk about reparations for what you have already done. If you're not ready to do that, then there's no conversation to be had. There's no discussion because you're not sincere. Sincerity, when people say, oh, we really want to, stop the oppression of different people, we really want to equalize the racial gap, and they say all these things. The question is, okay, so stop doing what you're doing. And the truth is, there's a lot of people who benefit from the continual, not just the past, but the continual exploitation of African people, not just who are Republicans, but also liberals. There are people who are benefiting inside of the welfare state, who benefit from these positions, who are on the boards of charities, who are the CEOs of charities, the CEOs of governmental organizations. These are people who benefit from our demise. And when you tell those people, well, forget, giving us back for the past, let's just start with stopping what you're doing. That's when it's going to be one of the story, because you're actually telling them to deprive themselves of what they have taken historically and what they have continued to take in order to maintain their lifestyle, in order to maintain their sense of security. And they're not really willing to do that. So I thought it was very interesting and telling that to Piers Morgan, he felt like Dr. Kendi was attacking the country. He didn't even start as saying, these things about Britain. He really started talking about Winston Churchill. But this was an attack on the country. And this, again, goes to why it is important to maintain these figures, these symbols, these ideals. Because the second you start questioning whether or not the country is actually about what it says it's about, that's viewed as an attack. Because if it's not about what it says it's about, then the country actually isn't better than anyone. Britain isn't better than Nazi Germany if they're really built on the blood and slavery of other people. And it's so funny when he said, oh, that's a bunch of baloney. Britain is not built off of racism. My question is always prove it. Prove it. Let's go back to this money that you got. Tell me, and it's not just stuff that you got in colonialism, stuff in neocolonialism. Tell me what you got that was not taken. Tell me what you got that was not stolen, that was not taken by manipulation, but that was not taken by tricking people. Show your burden is on you. The funny thing is they try to put the burden on us. Okay, prove to us that this is a white supremacist country. No, you are the one that committed slavery. You are the one that committed colonialism. I never enslaved your people. My people never colonized your people. My people never did any of those things to your people. My people never just started raping your woman and impregnating them with their babies and then sending those babies out to slavery. My people never did none of those things. My people never committed medical experiments on your people. So it's not my burden to prove that this is not a white supremacist country or this is not a white supremacist world. The burden's on you. Show me how you're not. Show me how you're not living off the spoils now. Show me. Let's track the money. Let's track the money that has not come from things, from deals, from corrupt deals that were done with African governments, with other governments. The burden's on you. Show me that you are able to stand on your own without extracting the goods of other people. And the fact is they couldn't do it. So always remember that the burden is not on you to ever prove to anyone that this is a racist country or that Britain's a racist country. The burden's on them. And until they can prove that it's not, then the conversation is over for me. This is a simple point that I thought was funny. So as far as I forget the guy's name, but the Professor Andrews said that one of his British heroes was, or her, I think it was a woman, was a Marxist. And Piers Morgan automatically reverted back to, oh, a Marxist. That's the type of person you do like? They are responsible for the slaughter of millions of people. I identify as a socialist, but I don't identify as a Marxist. But this idea that, oh, a Marxist, they're responsible for this. Can you say anything about Marxists that you can't say about capitalists? So are you trying to tell me that capitalists are not responsible for the slaughter of millions of people? Did you not know? Did you not read about the transatlantic slave trade? Did you not read about, heck, even Nazi Germany? That was not a Marxist state. That was a fascist state. And fascism is basically the last stage of capitalism. So what are you trying to say? You can't say things that are indictments against yourself and then expect to have a point. And that's what people don't understand. They're constantly pointing the finger at other people, but they're really saying things that equally apply to themselves and to their belief system. I like the point that was made by the bald-headed guy. I forget his name again. He said, well, why don't you go back to your country of Jamaica? You might be able to improve that country, you know, since you have so much privilege and whatnot. And the fact is, this a complete, it's bull. Because if the white supremacist system is still in place, there's no improving anything. You can lessen the burden. You can make it feel better. You might be able to even put the people in a better trance and maybe, you know, give them something that makes them feel okay inside of this position, okay being exploited, but you can't destroy the system. If you can't destroy the system, you can't end the misery. And that's really what I leave off with this video, is that we have to understand that these propaganda tools that are used against us, oh, go back to your country, you'll do good there. If the white supremacist system is still in existence, no, you won't do good there. You can't do anything. You can't do anything until the system is no longer in place. Till Jamaica is no longer exploited by Britain, by the United States, then there's no conversation as far as, oh, well, go there and, you know, use your skills there. Because even a lot of black people, and this goes for African people and the communities in America as well, we think that we go and get these degrees and that because of that we go back to our communities and that we'll be able to change things. Now, it doesn't mean that you won't be a positive influence among other types of people. For example, while I am against the police system in itself, if you are a good person and you sincerely care about your community, you could care about the black community, and you go and become a black police officer and you're actually responsive to the community, you don't treat people's sons like they're criminals, you don't beat anyone, you follow your moral code, you follow the black moral code. You're not gonna be quiet whenever your partner goes and does something corrupt. You're not gonna plant anything on your brothers and sisters. If you are that type of individual and you go into the police department, by all means, God bless you. But you going to the police department does not change the police department. It doesn't. I can't go into a system as an individual and change what the system is for. Because the system is always going to do what the system was designed to do. You might be someone who's a good voice in that system, who looks good in the system, who does good things in the system. But the system will always do what it is designed to do. And what you'll often find is that a lot of those people who really are good-hearted, who really do want to do good for the people, actually become fatigued because they realize that the system's always going to do what the system is going to do. And your role in the system is not going to be revolutionary if it's within the confines of the system. If you're following your job, your 9 to 5, you can't do anything revolutionary within the confines of your job description. If they created a job description for you, they would not create a job description that would lead to the disbandment of the company, of the organization. So it's always going to be within the confines of what the system is. And that's really the same thing as far as other countries, African countries. As long as the system of white supremacy, capitalism, as the system of colonialism is in place, you have certain puppets that are put inside of these governments. They say they're for the people, but realistically they're for themselves. Because they're for themselves, they're easy to corrupt. They're easy to get to abandon the principles of your country. They're easy to get to forget about the people of their country because they think about themselves. So the United States, China, Europe, they come over with some money. And they say, well, listen, we'll give you this, you know, if you give us access to all this stuff that is the natural resources of the people, or give us access, give us the ability to seize these lands, to do some land grabs, you know, we'll give you this. Then guess what? That politician doesn't care. So they'll give them access into your country. If you're not able to reform how things are done with the resources, with the land, then you're not able to do anything to stop the system from continuing. That has to be our focus. Not politicians, not who talks the best, who looks the best, but our focus has to be who's going to be able to restructure things in a better way. Because the way things are going on, it's not going to cut it. We keep re-electing these leaders and re-electing these personalities, but the reason why you feel the need to always re-elect someone is because these personalities are not going to change anything if they're not willing to fundamentally change the system, the way things are done. And in this case, what I'm talking about is the way that the resources, the natural resources, the means of production, the way that those things are controlled by the people and owned by the people. If you can't control that, then you're just going to go home to your country and you're going to go home with a good heart. But the fact is, if you can't change that, then you can't change your reality, because those resources, those means of production, that's the reason why you're in the condition you are in today. If it wasn't for that, no one would be messing with you. No one would be worried about you. They're only worried about you for the assets that you carry. So that's all I have. I would love to see y'all's comments on this crazy interview, this ridiculous interview. And I will see you all in another video.